Okay, so I've been seeing just a lot of buzz online lately
Yeah.
about this whole Sigma male thing.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a topic that's popped up everywhere. Lots of videos, articles.
Right. Videos, discussions. It feels like it's really captured people's attention. But
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
wading through some of that content, I kind of came away more confused than anything else. It feels like everyone has their own definition.
That happens a lot online, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially with these kinds of labels, interpretations can get varied.
Exactly. And I'm just wondering if we're really getting what it's all about, Maybe you listening have seen this too. Felt a bit curious, maybe skeptical.
Wanting to get past the hype.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing today. Let's actually try and dig in, figure out beyond the surface level stuff, what a Sigma male is supposed to be.
Okay, sounds good. It's a useful starting point because that online fascination, it does point to something real that resonates. A certain way of being, perhaps.
But you're right, the online takes can be, well, all over the place, sometimes missing the finer points.
Definitely.
So let's start right there. The basics. What is a Sigma male, really? What are the core ideas?
Well, at its heart, the concept describes someone who sort of operates outside the usual social hierarchies.
Okay, hierarchies like the alpha male thing we hear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially that kind of dominance-based structure. A key trait for the Sigma idea is profound independence.
Independence? How so?
They tend to live by their own rules. They're not really driven by needing approval from others or status within a group. They question things.
So they'll question norms, traditions.
Yeah, but not just to be rebellious. It's more about what makes logical sense to them. Does this rule actually serve a purpose?
Got it. So it's not necessarily being antisocial, it's more self-directed. They're not just following the crowd.
Precisely. That willingness to challenge the status quo, or even authority if it seems illogical, it comes from a really strong sense of self-reliance.
Yeah.
They trust their own judgment, their own instincts. Often you'll find they prefer to carve out their own path instead of just doing what's, expected.
Okay, that makes sense. Another thing I keep seeing mentioned is them being quiet, introverted. Is that a big part of it?
It's definitely a common characteristic, yes. They often do prefer solitude, or at least quieter environments. Too much social stimulation can be draining for them.
Right.
But, and this is important, that quietness usually isn't about shyness. It's often more about having this deep observational nature.
Observational.
Yeah. They're often quite confident, actually. But they prefer to listen, take things in, process information internally rather than, say, dominating the conversation or engaging in constant chatter.
So they're kind of gathering data, taking it all in before they speak or act.
That's a great way to put it. That observational skill lets them get a really full picture of situations. They notice things, nuances that other people might just miss.
Okay.
And because they tend to value genuine connection, they usually dislike superficial small talk. They'd much rather have a deeper, more meaningful conversation about ideas if they're going to talk.
That fits with the self-reliance you mentioned. Does that also affect how they handle problems? I kind of get the feeling they're not big on asking for help.
That's generally true, yeah. They tend to be very self-sufficient. They prefer to tackle challenges on their own.
Is that pride or?
It's usually not about arrogance, no.
Yeah.
It's more a deep-seated belief in their own capabilities.
Yeah.
A preference for finding their own solutions. They see problems almost like puzzles, things they can figure out, that whole do-it-yourself mindset.
Right, trusting their own skills. Now, what about when they do interact? Honesty seems to come up a lot, almost like blunt honesty.
Honesty is definitely a core value for the archetype. They tend to be very direct, straightforward.
Even if it's uncomfortable.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
They often prioritize truthfulness, even over maybe social niceties if they feel there's insincerity around. So while it might come across as brutally honest to some,
Yeah.
the intention usually isn't to hurt. It's more about cutting through the noise, getting to the actual point, the truth of the matter.
In a world where people, filter so much, that kind of directness, it probably stands out, doesn't it?
It really can. And for people who value that kind of sincerity, it can be incredibly refreshing.
But the flip side.
Well, the flip side is they tend to have a very low tolerance for dishonesty or manipulation. If they sense someone is being deceitful, they're likely to just distance themselves, maybe even cut ties.
Okay, that makes sense. And that leads to something else I've heard: they're quite selective about friends. Not unfriendly, but careful.
Exactly. Trust is something that's earned with them. It doesn't come easily or quickly. They generally prefer having a few really close genuine friends, over like a massive circle of casual acquaintances.
So they're discerning.
Very. About who they let into their inner world. But
Yeah.
once that trust is established, they're known for being incredibly loyal,
Yeah.
very supportive.
Okay. And one last core thing, what about emotions? The online stuff often paints them as really stoic, almost detached. Is that fair?
They do tend to present a calm, collected exterior, yes. They're not typically people who wear their hearts on their sleeves or show a lot of outward emotion.
And they still feel things.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't mean they don't feel deeply. They just tend to process those emotions more privately. And they often communicate how they feel more through actions rather than big emotional displays.
Interesting.
And they also have this ability to just walk away from conflict if they see it as pointless or unproductive.
Instead of getting sucked in.
Right. They might see disengaging as a position of control, actually. Emotional maturity, not letting ego drive the reaction. Even if they're angry, they might prioritize the truth or the goal over just winning the argument. That can look like stoicism from the outside.
Like a way to stay unfazed by attempts to, like, push their buttons.
Exactly. A kind of stoic indifference, perhaps, to keep control when others might be trying to manipulate them through emotion.
Okay, wow. So that brings up something you touched on earlier, this idea online that they can be dangerous. Where does that come from? It seems a bit contradictory to this quiet, independent picture.
It does seem contradictory on the surface, yeah.
Yeah.
But the dangerous label, or perhaps intimidating is a better word sometimes, it often stems directly from those traits we just discussed.
How so?
Well, think about it. Their independence makes them unpredictable to people who rely heavily on social cues, knowing where someone fits in the hierarchy. You can't easily pigeonhole them.
Okay, yeah.
Their quiet observation can be unnerving. You don't always know what they're thinking, what they've noticed, what they might be planning. It creates uncertainty.
And the self-reliance.
It means they aren't easily controlled or influenced by standard social pressures or emotional manipulation. They're playing by their own rule book.
So it's the lack of easy predictability. The fact that they don't fit neatly into a box makes some people uneasy, maybe even threatened.
I think that's a big part of it, yes. Because they aren't playing the standard social game, their actions can seem harder to anticipate. That quiet analysis, without revealing their hand, can be misinterpreted or feel intimidating.
They won't just be swayed by, like, peer pressure or emotional appeal.
Much less likely. Their internal compass is stronger. And that can seem dangerous to someone who relies on those tools to influence others.
It really sounds like their personal autonomy, their freedom to choose is just paramount.
That's a very, very accurate way to put it, yes.
So if that's what drives them, what are the things that really push their buttons in the other direction? What do Sigma males typically detest or try to avoid?
Okay. Well, given their focus on logic and authenticity, they have a strong aversion to, well, a few things. Making false assumptions is a big one.
Because they value evidence.
Exactly. Evidence-based thinking. Jumping to conclusions without facts really grates on them. Meaningless chatter, as we mentioned, is another. Yeah, they'd much rather have a real discussion or just silence.
Yeah.
Being forced into things is a major one, too. Anything that infringes on that autonomy we talked about.
Against their will. Yeah.
Absolutely. They also tend to steer clear of pervasive negativity, constant complaining without seeking solutions. They find it draining and unproductive.
Okay, so they prefer a more constructive vibe.
Definitely.
Oh.
Which is why they also dislike the whole playing the victim thing. Lack of personal responsibility is a turnoff.
Right.
Oh, and conversational narcissism. People who just talk at you, never listen, that drives them nuts.
I think that drives most people nuts, eventually.
True. But especially those who value real exchange. Also, blind conformity, just going along with the herd without thinking.
Yeah.
That's totally counter to their nature.
Herd mentality, yeah.
And related to that, arrogance. People talking down to others. They have little patience for that. Oh, and interruptions. Constant interruptions really break their focus.
I can see that, given the internal processing you mentioned.
They often find really dramatic social situations overwhelming, too.
Yeah.
And they can struggle to figure out how to, gracefully exit those intense scenes.
Okay. Anything else specific?
Yeah, a few more practical things maybe. Cheesy pickup lines, manipulative dating games, definite no-goes, insincere flattery or praise feels really hollow to them. And maybe a bit random, but excessively chatty salespeople often rub them the wrong way.
Too much surface-level interaction, perhaps.
Probably. They tend to avoid people they perceive as big-mouthed, those who just talk constantly and drain their energy without adding much substance.
So summing that up, it really sounds like they prioritize substance, logic, authenticity, and their own autonomy above pretty much everything else.
That's a really good synthesis of it, yes.
Yeah.
Substance, autonomy, authenticity.
Okay, so moving on from dislikes.
Hmm.
What about attraction or partnerships? What do women, for instance, tend to notice about them, and what do they look for in a partner?
Right. Well, from the perspective of what others might notice, women often pick up on a few things. Their adventurous spirit can be appealing, and openness to new experiences, maybe outside the norm.
Not stuck in a rut.
Exactly. Also, their confidence in just being different. They're not desperately seeking everyone's approval, and that can be attractive.
Secure in themselves.
Yes. They also don't always feel the need to make the first move in dating scenarios, which can be intriguing or sometimes confusing.
A bit more reserved.
Can be. Another thing often mentioned is direct eye contact comes across as confident, engaged. Their sense of style, too, is often unique. Not just following trends, it's personal.
Authentic again.
Right. Compliments from them might be rare, but when they give one, it usually feels very genuine and meaningful. They're also often quite skilled with nonverbal communication. And they can take control of a conversation, not aggressively, but intelligently steering it.
Okay, so what are they looking for if they value authenticity and independence so much?
Good question. They typically seek a partner who respects that independence. Someone who doesn't use things like the silent treatment as a way to punish or control.
Right, no games.
No games. They aren't looking for someone who wants to mold them into some ideal partner. They want acceptance for who they are.
Makes sense.
They're often drawn to a confident woman, someone who isn't easily threatened or made insecure by their independence or their need for occasional space. Trustworthiness is huge.
Of course.
Yeah. Someone who is clear about boundaries, doesn't constantly seek external validation for their worth, and, importantly, a good listener. Someone non-judgmental who doesn't interrupt constantly, who allows them space to think and speak.
So mutual respect for autonomy and genuine communication seem key.
Absolutely. A partner who complements their independence rather than trying to curtail it.
Now, it can't all be smooth sailing, right? Operating outside the norm like this? There must be challenges. A dark side, maybe? Or just difficulties they face?
Oh, definitely. It's not necessarily a dark side in the sinister sense, but there are absolutely frustrations and challenges. One big one can be the frustration of seeing mediocrity or incompetence get rewarded, maybe through social maneuvering, while their own quiet competence goes overlooked.
Yeah, that must be grating.
It can be. There's also sometimes a feeling of being a lone wolf, in a world that's so heavily focused on group dynamics and social connection in a certain way. It can feel isolating at times.
I can imagine.
And think about childhood. A kid who is naturally curious, independent, always asking why, questioning rules, they might have been misunderstood, labeled difficult.
Instead of just being independent thinkers.
Exactly. So that experience of being misunderstood or constantly underestimated because they're quiet can follow them. Being questioned constantly, it takes a toll.
And fitting into things like, I don't know, team building exercises or highly structured social events.
Yeah, those can be really difficult. Dealing with peer pressure to conform when it feels illogical or inauthentic to them is a constant low-level struggle for some.
Okay. So it's not always easy being wired that way.
Not at all. It requires a strong sense of self to navigate effectively.
There's something specific I've heard mentioned. When a Sigma male goes silent, what does that signify? Is it like the silent treatment they dislike?
That's different. Generally, no, it's not intended as a manipulative tactic like the silent treatment they avoid. When a Sigma goes truly silent on someone or a situation, it often signifies a final decision has been made.
Like the end of the road.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
It's not usually the start of processing, it's the result of it. By the time their silence becomes really noticeable, especially after being pushed too far or seeing consistent negative patterns,
Yeah.
they've likely already analyzed the situation, weighed the options internally, and come to a conclusion. The silence is the outward manifestation of an internal withdrawal or decision. Their exit strategy might already be quietly in motion.
So if you notice that silence, it might already be too late to change things.
In many cases, that's the implication, yes. The discussion phase for them has probably concluded internally.
Wow. Okay. That leads to another dynamic. People talk about the alpha versus sigma thing. Why might alphas, who are supposedly about dominance, sometimes seem hesitant to, directly cross a sigma?
That's an interesting perception that comes up. Part of it might be the Sigma's analytical skill. They're seen as hard to outwit because they're constantly observing, analyzing, reading situations very quickly.
Less predictable, like you said before.
Exactly. Alphas often rely on establishing clear dominance, predictable power dynamics. The sigma doesn't operate cleanly within that framework.
Yeah.
Their power, if you want to call it that, is quieter, less obvious, harder to gauge and counter directly.
So the alpha might hesitate because the outcome isn't guaranteed.
Potentially.
Hmm.
Engaging with someone whose reactions aren't based on standard social dominance cues introduces uncertainty. That quiet observation we keep mentioning can be genuinely intimidating. You don't know what they know or what they're planning.
And sigmas aren't necessarily looking for a power struggle anyway.
Generally not for ego's sake, no. If they engage in something that looks like a power play, it's usually strategic, a means to an end, achieving a specific goal efficiently, or protecting their autonomy rather than just wanting to be top dog. That lack of ego-driven confrontation can also be disarming or confusing to someone expecting a direct challenge.
That's fascinating. Just briefly, before we wrap up, does this translate into parenting at all? If a sigma becomes a dad,
It's thought to, yeah. The parenting style might involve teaching kids how to think, encouraging them to question things respectfully, leading by example in terms of independence and problem solving, fostering self-reliance, maybe even teaching them how to read people in situations, that observational skill.
passing on those core traits.
Potentially, yes. Valuing competence and independent thought in their kids.
This has been incredibly insightful. Seriously, it helps make sense of a lot of the chatter and gives a much clearer picture. It's definitely more complex than just a trendy label.
Absolutely. It describes a certain constellation of traits, a way of navigating the world that exists outside some of the more commonly discussed social roles. It's about that independence, observation, the internal compass.
Yeah. It's been really helpful to kind of pull apart the hype and look at the actual characteristics. Thank you for taking this deep dive with me.
My pleasure. It's always good to explore these archetypes and understand the nuances, look beyond the easy labels people use online.
So for you listening, hopefully this deep dive into the idea of the Sigma male has given you something to think about. Maybe it highlighted the value of independence for you, or the quiet power of just observing, or maybe just the importance of living authentically, whatever that looks like.
Different ways to navigate.
Right. It definitely makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might understanding this kind of mindset, this Sigma approach, maybe help you in your own interactions? Or what aspects, if any, resonate with how you approach life? Something to mull over, perhaps.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us.